a cannabis law department wouldn't stop nagging at me. So at my previous firm, I thought, let's take the plunge, and so I opened the UK's first dedicated cannabis law department, and things just really snowballed. You know, there was a very small CBD industry already, and it was growing rapidly. And then my timing was very good, because 6 months later, the UK Home Office suddenly legalised medicinal cannabis, much to everyone's surprise. And it just completely snowballed from there. So yeah, the last 3 years, I've just been advising CBD and medicinal cannabis companies on all of the day-to-day regulatory issues that they face.
Fantastic. Heather, over to you. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, so my background is in fund admin mostly, and I actually joined Ince and then started working with Robert because we had an inquiry for a cannabis fund from Gibraltar. So we had that waiting to go, and that's kind of how we started working between Robert's area and linking it to Gibraltar, really.
Okay, great. So, Robert, why don't you tell us a little bit about the position, the global position on cannabis regulation to date?
So the first country to go fully legal was Uruguay in 2013. They were very early movers, and they had a drug problem there, and they decided that legalisation was the right way to try and address it. They have a very interesting model whereby you can buy your cannabis from a pharmacy, and these are government-run pharmacies. You have to register with the government, and you're allowed to buy something like 40 grams a month. And it's been very successful in combating organised crime in the country. The next big country to go legal was Canada in 2017, and this was a very sort of long process. They spent about 4 years planning how to do this. It's generally been quite successful. You know, we have some very big Canadian licensed producers like Canopy and Aurora, who are very active globally now. But the real success story is America. So we have probably around 40 states in America that has some form of legal cannabis. I think it's about around 15 have full adult use cannabis markets. And so now the real big players in the global market are the American MSOs, the multi-state operators, these big companies like Curaleaf, like Green Thumb Industries, who had operations across the US, and they're generating big revenues now, and now they're coming over to Europe and looking for interesting cannabis companies to acquire. And probably the biggest deal in the UK and Europe was recently EMAC Life Sciences, which is a medicinal cannabis company based in the UK, was purchased by Curaleaf for $285 million. And then above that, although this wasn't a purchase by an MSO, GW Pharmaceuticals, which was the first THC cultivation operation in the UK, was bought by a US pharmaceutical company called Jazz Pharmaceuticals for $7.2 billion. So yeah, it's an exciting time globally, and we're looking for more countries to start taking that step.
This is definitely very interesting. Before I go over to you, Heather, mainly because there are startups that you believe could be acquired within the industry. So that's one of the things that's super interesting. There is also a local who got acquired by Canada Pharmaceuticals, so it's very relatable to Gibraltar.
Yeah, a lot of these big companies, they want organic growth, but when you are moving to a new continent, the easiest way to grow is inorganic growth. So you go and you find a company that's doing well, that's got a good business generating revenue, and you buy it. So I think there are lots of American MSOs now scouring Europe for interesting businesses that they can add to their portfolio.
Fantastic. So Heather, what's the position in Gibraltar? Will you fill us in?
So the position in Gibraltar is obviously the law is not yet in place. So we do have medicinal cannabis can be utilized by doctors here, and it's actually it's bigger than the UK actually on that point. But the Process of Crime Act currently doesn't allow to use the use of investment vehicles or anything like that. It's being worked on.
Okay.
That was obviously pre-COVID, pre-Brexit, not the biggest priority right now in terms of negotiations and all of that. So the legislation's there. It's close.
Okay. Fantastic. So, Robert, back to you. Medical cannabis has been legalized since 2018 in the UK, but there's very little progress so far. Why do you think this is the case?
So we were all delighted that medical cannabis got legalized in 2018. It happened off the back of a stellar media campaign. these mothers were going to places like Holland to get medication for their children who had severe epilepsy. And as they were coming back into the UK, the Border Force was seizing this medication from them. And it was on every front page of every newspaper in the UK. And public opinion swung behind medical cannabis very quickly. And that galvanized the Home Office to move very quickly as well. So a 6-week consultation, and all of a sudden medical cannabis was legalized, and everyone was delighted about this, and we thought this is real progress. Unfortunately, since then, things have moved very, very slowly. The number of prescriptions that are being written and fulfilled in the UK is still under 1,000, which is very, very low. If you think about medical cannabis markets in Europe, like Germany, where they have hundreds of thousands of medical cannabis patients receiving prescriptions and having their prescriptions fulfilled. So the reasons why things have moved very slowly in the UK, there are many reasons. One is there's a lack of education and training amongst doctors. Doctors do not feel comfortable prescribing these medications because they haven't actually had any training in what they do and how to dose them. The way the legislation is written is very restrictive, so it's almost that to prescribe a cannabis-based medication, it has to be a treatment of last resort. So if you have a serious medical condition which has 22 other possible treatments, you will have to try every single one before you can finally move on to a cannabis-based medication. And also, the way the regime is structured, there's a big cost in importing cannabis medicines into the UK, and that cost is obviously transferred to the patients. So people who are receiving medical cannabis prescriptions, they can be paying £800, £1,000 a month to fulfill that prescription. And most people couldn't afford that kind of money on medication every month. The good news is that there are lots of organisations working very hard at the moment to try and increase access to patients, and that includes bringing down the cost of fulfilling the prescriptions, rolling out education programs to doctors so that they feel comfortable in prescribing these medications. But until we see wholesale access being granted to patients, because demand is massive, there are hundreds of thousands of registered patients in the UK who want access to medical cannabis. But until the price comes down, people are going to grow at home or buy from the street, and that risks then being criminalised. They are self-medicating, and the risk is the police come and arrest them, take away their grow facility, and it's a situation that needs to change.
Sounds like an industry that's ready to explode.
Absolutely, lots and lots of companies making good money are the ones selling the hydroponic equipment so people can grow at home. But I think, people don't want to grow at home. They don't want to buy from the street. They want to buy good quality products from a reputable supplier. And at the moment, it's a form of financial discrimination because only the very wealthy can access these products.
I think it's that the legislation comes first, but it's not only the first step to completing it. It's logistics. It's actually education. All of these aspects follow on. Legislation only gets us so far.
Yeah, definitely. So what would you say are the key concerns and issues identified by other jurisdictions, and what alternative actions have been taken by other British overseas territories and the Channel Islands, for example?
Yeah, so a lot has taken place in the other territories. So Bermuda really led the way. They actually decriminalised possession up to 7 grams. So they got that through, then they went through a medicinal regime, but it's actually stopped because it passed through their first house of Parliament and it's at their upper house pending approval. It's not yet being approved. The same has happened in the BVI. They won't get royal assent on it. So these go further than the UN regulations on it, the international regulations on it, and whilst big countries can do that, so Canada has done that. They know they call it a technical breach of the UN regulations, but the UK has taken a different view. So that's kind of impacts down all the way down to the other territories, and Gibraltar, rightly so, is considering how that plays out. Its legislation will really focus on that UK compliant route.
That's fantastic, thanks, Heather. So, Robert, the wellness sector has advanced rapidly, and this has resulted in the UK becoming the second largest CBD market globally after the US. What have been the key factors for this?
I think, so just on a basic level, people always thought of cannabis as being split into two, medical and adult use, or recreational cannabis. And in recent years, it's become very clear there's three very distinct sectors. So you've got medical, which is very highly regulated in the UK. On the other end, you've got adult use or recreational cannabis, which isn't legal yet. And then in the middle, you've got this CBD wellness sector, which has been highly unregulated for a period of time. So lots of early movers have been able to generate huge amounts of revenue with very little oversight, very little regulation, and they've been enjoying life actually in that unregulated environment. The popularity of the products has increased very quickly. So CBD doesn't have any psychotropic effect, it doesn't get you high, but it has a wealth of medicinal qualities. And because it's plant-derived, because it comes from the hemp plant, I think it's very appealing to people who have medical ailments. Rather than using a chemical that's been formulated in a lab, they'd rather use something that sounds a bit more natural, that is a bit more natural. And so lots of people are now buying CBD products to address a wealth of medical issues. The difficulty for the wellness market is that you're not allowed to make any medical claims. So it's a very strange situation where people are buying CBD for its medical qualities, but nobody can actually talk about its medical qualities. The lack of regulation has caused issues as well. There's been a number of bad actors within the sector who have been selling poor quality products. There was a big study in 2018 in relation to 30 well-known brands in the UK, and some of these brands didn't have any CBD in them at all, which is bad news for business, because you don't want those kinds of operators acting in the sector. So what happened was the UK decided to introduce the novel food regime. So novel food is actually an EU regulation. It is the benchmark for food quality and food safety in the world. You do not have a higher level of assessment, safety analysis for food than novel food. That has now been imposed on the CBD sector, much to everyone's complaints, because it's a very expensive and difficult process. But it seems that the majority of the CBD industry have engaged with the novel food process. You now have to be novel food compliant to be able to sell your products lawfully in the UK. And we hope that this will now be a platform for CBD to really enter the mainstream. I think a lot of big brands and big players have been holding off from entering the sector because of the uncertain nature of the regulatory environment. Novel food now gives these companies and retailers, Boots and Tesco's and Sainsbury's, they can now clearly identify which are the compliant products and which aren't the compliant products, and that makes it that much easier for them to stock them in their shops. So we hope that novel food will be a platform for this industry to even take off to the next level, because it's grown so fast. The attention that it's had, it needed cleaning up, and we hope that novel food is doing that.
Yeah, it sounds like the key issue at the moment. I mean, in Gibraltar, the financial services success story is down to regulation. Would you agree with that, Heather?
Yeah, and we've obviously seen local success with CBD. Yeah, Hemp Passion, these guys, it's a very big market in Gibraltar. CBD is doing well. And I think more regulation, more clarity for consumers, and this is ultimately dealing with legislation about the man on the street and their understanding. I think that's key.
So I'm staying with you for a sec. Do you think there needs to be a cultural shift to acceptance for the use of cannabis and CBD?
I think that in Gibraltar, the cultural shift has happened in the last few years.
Yeah.
It's continuing to happen. I think we're not educated on it. In terms of medicinal uses, what actually works for countries where it is legal at a federal level. So it has to be comfortable to society. This is not just a financial services regulation that kind of the man on the street has no interest in. I think it has to be culturally acceptable, first of all.
Yeah, good point. So, Robert, what do you think would be mainstreaming of CBD wellness products and possible introduction of adult use cannabis markets in the UK and Europe?
Well, look, I'm not an advocate of any kind, but in terms of, I don't like the word recreational cannabis. It risks trivializing cannabis use, and I think there are many reasons why people use cannabis. Obviously, we know about the medical reasons, but there are spiritual reasons, there are creative reasons. I know people that use it for tantric sex, and there are a range of uses for cannabis. My view is that you can have a highly regulated adult use market and do it in a safe and compliant way, but it has to be done in conjunction with education. You can't just make it a free-for-all. Suddenly all of these products are available and people don't understand what they do or how to use them. If you look at things like cigarette use, cigarette smoking falls year on year, the rates fall year on year. Kids know from a very young age that they can smoke cigarettes when they grow up if they want to, but they're very, very bad for you in a number of ways, and most of them choose not to. I mean, I even hear that at universities, the rates of drinking alcohol is dropping as well, because more and more people would rather post a gym selfie of themselves on Instagram than go and drink 10 or 12 pints every week. So I think we will have an adult use market in the UK. I think it's inevitable. I think we have to watch closely what happens in the US. I think if there's big movement at the federal level, then the dominoes will start falling. But it has to be done in a sensible and regulated way. Regulation is a good thing. I'm a regulatory lawyer, so I would say that. But ultimately, regulation brings consumer confidence, it brings market stability, and that's what we want so this industry can really take off.
Sure. So this is a question, Elizabeth, for both of you, and also we've touched upon already, but what will this further legislation do to protect the risks involved in medical cannabis and the CBD industry, and I suppose investment also, Heather?
Yeah, from an investment point of view, people who are funding investment need to know that their investment is secure, that it's legal, that they're not going to create a problem for themselves 3, 4, 5 years down the line. If they invest in something that did say yes, they made a fantastic return, which obviously they'd hoped for, but they're not creating a huge problem for themselves later on. I think clarity, regulation brings clarity, it brings security, and ultimately retail investors can also invest. I've seen it with listings on the LSE. It's important that retail investors understand what they're actually legally allowed to do.
Yeah. And in terms of proceeds from crime and etc., this is the kind of thing that needs to be within the legislation, I suppose.
Definitely. Proceeds of crime, obviously, people do stuff now, people are investing now, but from a retail point of view, for example, in the UK, you can invest in Canadian adult use recreational companies that are listed, but actually you're contributing proceeds of crime. So having clarity, having protection for investors and for the investment is critical.
And your comments, Robert?
It's an incredibly frustrating situation in the UK, because whenever you ask the authorities, whether it be the Home Office or the National Crime Agency, and you say, look, this is what I'm proposing to do, this is the transaction that we want to carry out, are you okay with this? You get this stock response. Basically, we're not saying yes, we're not saying no, it's for you to be sure that you are acting in a compliant fashion. And a lot of big institutions, a lot of financial institutions, a lot of investors will get that response and say, you know what, until I've got clarity, I'm not prepared to go forward. But it's an entirely theoretical issue. No one has been arrested or prosecuted in the UK for investing in cannabis, for carrying out cannabis-related transactions. So although it is only theoretical, when large amounts of money are changing hands, you have to address this issue. Even if it's almost certain there won't be a problem, that tiny chance that it may arise, it has to be addressed. And I think we are looking for clarity from the Home Office, from the government, that we can do this business, that we can go forward with these transactions without fear of the NCA coming along and seizing money and assets and that sort of thing. So that's what we're looking for. Fantastic.
So, Heather, UK will have to look at legislation or regulation outside of the EU now. What will this include, and obviously will Gibraltar need to follow?
I think it gives the UK a great opportunity. They can now set their own regulation. They obviously, we know that they're looking for new avenues of growth and perhaps position themselves as a world leader on something. On that element would be great for Gibraltar. Investment into legalised cannabis will happen. It's coming, we know that. And then we'll see how it filters. If the UK goes further in terms of adult use, recreational, that would be a stage 2 for Gibraltar. Let's work on stage 1, get public acceptance, work with the legislation, see what works actually in practice, and then move into stage 2, I think, in time.
Fantastic. Robert?
Well, I'll happily admit that I'm a massive Ramoner. I was a super Remainer. I thought Brexit was a really stupid idea, and I've always been very open about that. Now it's happened, then I think there is an obligation on the UK government to use its newfound freedom to act unilaterally to make the UK a great jurisdiction for cannabis business. And this is, so we've all heard about how well the UK's done with vaccines, and how it was because of Brexit it created the political environment that allowed the UK to go it alone and get all the vaccines in. Although they approved the vaccines under EU regulations, emergency EU regulations, it was the ability to act on their own rather than go in a block with the EU that they were able to get ahead of the game in terms of vaccines. The other success story that bizarrely I think is hugely underreported in the UK is the novel food regime. So the UK has taken the EU novel food regime, recreated it with a different timetable and an exemption that allows companies to continue to sell. And this is the kind of opportunity that the UK now has to act on its own, to take existing EU regulations, improve them in the UK, and create a really, really good environment for cannabis business to thrive. Does anyone have any confidence that this government will actually do that? I'll leave that for you to decide, but there are opportunities here, and I think it really is on the UK government to start looking at these opportunities once they've got COVID under control, to support UK business and UK farmers as well who want to cultivate cannabis too.
In a sense, they can just fast track outside of the block now.
Yeah, exactly. They don't have to consult with 27 other countries to make a unified decision. It's not a situation where they are going to be trying things that have never been tried before. You can actually look at other jurisdictions where there are legal cannabis markets. You know, places like Canada, there is now 3-4 years of data available to show what impact legalisation has had. And I think for the most part, all of the evidence is positive that legalisation and regulation can work, and it reduces things like street crime. It creates hundreds of thousands of jobs. It generates billions of dollars of tax revenue for the Canadian government. Post-pandemic, I think the UK is going to need more job creation, more tax revenue than ever before, and cannabis is a no-brainer as far as I'm concerned.
And it's UK-wide. It's not Southeast London focused. It would impact agriculture, farmers throughout the UK, and that's obviously a position that they want to take.
It's such a good point, because when I tell people I'm a cannabis lawyer, they say, "Oh, that's very niche." That's very niche. It's not niche. Cannabis is so wide; it covers so many different aspects of business. You have agriculture, you have food standards, you have cosmetics, you have vaping, you have so many different areas of business. Cannabis, can touch on that. It's a really, really huge industry just waiting to take that next step.
Yeah, supply chains, distribution, all that. Okay, so back to Gibraltar. What are the benefits that a startup would have when looking at Gibraltar as a place to base themselves or to set up?
I think the key thing from Gibraltar's point of view is that the law is not yet in place, but we're all learning, we're all working on this at the moment, and that's a key advantage, to have all the practitioners lined up, ready to go for a startup, ready to help that startup. Obviously, we have the good tax position, we have ease of access, so ease of access to Europe, to the UK. We're well positioned in terms of logistics, but I think it's that key aspect of knowledge, first of all, and working with people who are already dealing in it.
Robert?
I've heard there's some pretty big caves in the rock as well that might make for good cultivation sites. That's what I've heard, yeah. So, I mean, look, there are so many opportunities in cannabis because of the supply chain that you mentioned. So you've got cultivation, you've got extraction, you've got manufacturing, you've got branding, you've got this whole supply chain. And what smart, sensible startups are doing, they're looking at this supply chain and seeing where can we insert ourselves. And there are so many areas where you can identify a need, and then gradually as you establish yourself in that part of the supply chain, you start generating revenue, then you can look to move into other areas. And ultimately, that's the destination that people want to be in, is to be completely vertically integrated, to be involved at every area of the supply chain. From a startup perspective, if I was doing it, I would be looking for areas that will generate IP, that will be extremely lucrative over a long period of time. We were just discussing earlier, actually, that there's always been this rush to go and get a cultivation license. Everyone thinks, right, cannabis is legal, I want to grow. What people don't know is that actually cultivation requires a huge amount of capital expenditure to get it off the ground. It's going to take a long time before you start seeing any return on that investment. So a lot of smart companies are now going to the other end of the supply chain and saying, right, let's be consumer facing. We can create a brand, we can create a product, start selling, generating revenue straight away, and then that looks good on the balance sheet. You then receive more investment and more interest, and then you can start working your way back down the supply chain. So for startups, I think there's huge opportunities here, and now technology is coming in, blockchain and that sort of thing, which is a really good crossover with the cannabis industry. So it's an exciting time.
So for Gibraltar, yeah, it doesn't have to be cultivation. We don't need size. It can be startups, marketing, brand building, IP, all of those elements that we do see in Gibraltar that do connect very well with our existing businesses, our financial services, our blockchain, DLT. All of these could link. It's a very multi-jurisdictional business, and Gibraltar is well positioned for that. We have the ability, we're so multicultural, that to have those connections and use the Gibraltar sort of network of alumni basically around the world, that works well.
Yeah. So before I ask you the last question, which is really about this also, please think of any questions you'd like to ask Heather or Robert. And we have any questions online?
Not at the moment.
Okay, so if anybody wanted to ask a question online, I think I can see, is there an opportunity for Gibraltar government to enter into some sort of joint venture with the Kingdom of Morocco to produce a world-leading combination of expertise, legislation, investor framework, research, and production? There you go. You can actually see the questions. I wasn't sure.
I think that will come maybe in the second stage. We have to see what legislation brings in commercial business. In actual, having legislation in place is one thing. What opportunities actually come off the back of that? So as I said, we were working, Robert and I, on a fund that's looking to launch when it becomes, when the Proceeds of Crime Act is adjusted here. So that's one element. We would have to see what our community brings out of it. What is obviously we have the Gibraltar Morocco Business Association or community. Maybe an opportunity comes from commercials. It has to be commercially driven.
Okay.
As the cannabis market develops and as more products become available, it's going to start to become about the story behind those products, right? And if I was a cannabis consumer and I'm looking at where do I want my products to come from? Do I want them to be produced in an underground bunker in the UK, or would I want it to come from Morocco, where they have hundreds of years of expertise of growing the best cannabis and producing the best hash? So a tie-up with a country like Morocco, where they have this wonderful history and story of cannabis, that's going to be attractive to consumers. People will like the idea of the cannabis being grown outdoors in a natural environment, in the sunshine, and then produced into these fantastic products by people with a wealth of expertise. So yeah, I think that's definitely something Gibraltar should be considering if I was in charge.
I mean, for the wellness industry, brand has always been key. A large number of products are very similar in the wellness industry, and it's all about their story, their branding, their founder. How did it impact the founder's life? What changed in their experience? Why did they develop this company? So that's why it's so key for startups, and that's where startups will benefit. It won't be controlled by a large corporate at this time. It's that story. You're buying into a story.
There's a certain level of autonomy at this point. Very good point. There's one more question. Morning, how to differentiate CBD, CBG from the various supply channels, online shops, pharmacy, and or private sellers on quality price?
Well, I mean, look, it's very difficult because there are now lots and lots of producers of CBD and CBG, and that has placed a great deal of downward pressure on prices, which is good for brands who are buying in their product. How you differentiate the quality, I would suggest that you should be seeking supplies from more regulated markets. So interestingly, in the UK, we have this crazy restriction where you can cultivate hemp under a license in the UK, but you can't use the best parts of the plant. So the bud, the flower, the leaves, you've got to throw it away. So in fact, in the UK, although there's loads of CBD being sold, none of that CBD is being produced in the UK. It's crazy. Really. These farmers have to throw away 60, 70, 80% of the plant. So all of the CBD we are consuming in the UK is being imported either from the US or from Eastern Europe. And businesses in the UK are looking for high quality, reputable suppliers. The US has a huge hemp cultivation industry, and so there are some really, really good operators there who are focusing on the UK and Europe. In Eastern Europe, in Bulgaria and Romania and Macedonia, and they have a long history of hemp cultivation as well. So it is difficult. You've got to shop around a bit. Finding the cheapest product, as with anything, is not going to mean the best quality. You've got to look for those operators who've been in business a while, who are familiar working in a regulated environment, and hopefully that will help you find the best product for what you're planning to do.
That's great.
Heather? I think that's going to be more important as well as consumers get more educated, and they're going to demand higher standards. We've seen it on other industries, and people don't expect it. They're going to ask for, how can I source this? How can I see all the way back to where it grew? And that's where the blockchain element can come in. All these different sides. I think consumers expect high quality now.
And I think it's a good point, because if you look at markets like the US, where there has been legal cannabis for 10, 12, 15 years, people are very knowledgeable. I follow some cannabis users on Twitter, and the discussions about the products, how they're made, the ingredients, it's incredibly detailed. And much like people can be wine connoisseurs and they want to know how their wine was made, which region it was produced, the same is true of cannabis. People will want to know the story. They'll want to know that it's being produced in an environmentally friendly fashion, that kind of thing. So ultimately, yes, the story and the quality of the products is going to be a big driver for revenue.
In particular, as well, with the sustainability angle, the ethical side, consumers expect to be able to see what is ethical, where was it grown, is it sustainable now, has it been transported sustainably? All of these ESG reporting requirements, all of that will impact across the cannabis industry as well.
Yes, sustainability is definitely also a massive industry. Any questions from the live audience? Go ahead.
Do I get a microphone? Or
yes.
Shout really loud? I don't want shouting.
Speak up.
Hi guys. We spoke a lot about the regulation for startups coming in as investment vehicles, for example. What about the regulation that's being looked at for the medical framework? I know you mentioned there's opportunity for some patients, but for example, even in the privatized sector of medical cannabis, that could be an opportunity, not necessarily for a startup, but for companies pre-existing who are looking to come and put their mark on the Gibraltar market. As you said, the CBD market in Gibraltar is very strong. It's a pretty closed market, so there's a very captive audience. Also a very strong opportunity for companies in the medical sector outside of Gibraltar who are looking to come in and be involved and support the economy.
Yeah, I think we're definitely going to run it in a two-stage approach. So let's get the investment ability through. Let's get that in place. Let's work internationally on that side. And then there will be a medical discussion, I'm sure. There's definitely, from my conversations that I've had with the people in the business and government, there's not a pushback. I think people are quite supportive of it. So it's just the timing. We've got Brexit to deal with, we've got COVID. it will get there. It's just, I think we've got to break it down.
Just wait. Yeah. Thank you. Robert?
So there's a really good podcast called The Cannabis Conversation, which I listen to, and I would highly recommend it. And recently they had a chap called Oliver Zugel on, and Oliver's a really knowledgeable guy. He works with a licensed producer in Colombia. And he broke down the medical cannabis sector. He said that he expects there to be two parts to the medical cannabis sector. You'll have pharmaceutical cannabis, which is highly regulated, serious medical conditions, doctors prescribing. But then you'll have a section beneath that, which he describes as modern ailments, so anxiety, sleep, pain, and ultimately that's what they've done in America. So you have these dispensary models, where people can go in and they can buy their rec products, they can buy their CBD, they can buy their medical cannabis products, all under one roof. You can only reach that point once everyone agrees that, in fact, there's very little harm that can be done by these products, that people can go and experiment and see what works for them. So from a medical perspective, the UK is still very far behind where the US is. And I think as things progress in Gibraltar, they'll have to have a sort of serious discussion about how they want to address this medical regime, or whether they do it in a similar fashion to the UK. But it's very, very early days, and I think we've got a long way to go before we catch up with jurisdictions like the US and Canada.
Now, medical developments in Gibraltar have obviously come a long way. We've seen a lot of work done with COVID. A lot of testing being done here, a lot of sequencing. Some Gibraltarian scientists have obviously been key in London in influencing PPE law, development of vaccine, etc. So I think we're now starting to see that link, and that's where the university comes in. Well, it's a new sector, I think, for Gibraltar. Having that university-led connection between business, I think, is a new thing, and it's going to work.
And health tech is going to be big business, post-pandemic. I have to say the testing here is great compared to the UK. The COVID testing regime over there is a nightmare. So I think developments in medical cannabis fits nicely into that health tech arena, and I think this is a real growth sector, not just in the UK but globally as well.
Yeah, I think it's also, Gibraltar can also fast track to a certain degree because of the size. So it could be a very interesting and exciting story in the future. So just to wrap things up, I'll start with you, Robert. What advice would you give any startup looking at the industry presently?
One of the challenges for startups in the UK is banking. Banking is a real issue. Most of the big banks, they have no appetite for the sector just yet. I know there's a guy from a bank here. So
there's a few bankers here.
But hopefully we will see some changes soon. So it's all, obviously you've got to find the right idea for your business, but you've got to look at all of the support services that business needs. So it's really, really important to make sure you've got banking in place. If you're moving product around, you need a good shipping agent. All of these ancillary services are vital to be able to run your business. So do focus on those parts of your idea as well as how you're going to generate your revenue. But there are lots of more providers who are becoming more supportive of the sector, and it's becoming easier.
I think we might have some bankers online as well, and it's just another question come through. What would be the benefits for a startup looking at Gibraltar, Heather?
I think Gibraltar offers a very easy environment to set up a business in. There's a lot of highly skilled professionals around the sector, so lawyers, accountants, and we have a big international network, and that's a key thing. So, being able to refer somebody to Robert in London, or, to Canadian counterparts that we have. Gibraltar has a connection to a lot of jurisdictions, and that's very useful in this market of just, we're not trying to keep everything. We're happy to work with other sectors, other jurisdictions.
You also have to be very brave. You actually have to be quite courageous in this industry, because where there are grey areas, there is a natural urge to shrink away from them and say, okay, I don't feel comfortable. It's the companies who have found a way to be comfortable with that commercial level of risk that are going to be the ones that get ahead. So yeah, have a bit of courage, be brave, And don't be afraid of regulatory intervention. You are going to brush up against the regulators at some point. It is inevitable as regulation increases. I always try and encourage my clients to use regulatory intervention as an opportunity. I call it free consultancy. You know, you can go and pay an industry consultant £500 an hour to tell you how to do things, or you can wait for the regulators to come and speak to you and then say, right, this is my opportunity, help me be compliant, and you get it for free. So regulatory intervention is nothing to be afraid of. It's going to happen. You just have to manage it well.
And they can always hire someone like you, right?
But yeah, I'm probably about the same cost as the consultant. So you know, maybe try it on your own, and then if you really need help, then I'm here.
So just on that note, Heather, Robert, you're both available to give people any advice after this session. You can always contact me, and we will pass on any other questions or advice that people need. Final question online is, if you are a private seller with a really good CBD full spectrum of products, how is it possible to establish legal partnership with bigger resellers focusing on quality rather than quantity?
If you have a good quality product, then there will always be people interested in it. This is the difficult thing with CBD. Everyone thinks you can make a brand and suddenly the money's going to come rolling in. It's actually quite a difficult market to break into, because there is currently quite a lot of choice. It's like anything. You have to work very hard at generating revenue. You have to be patient as well. So the way CBD products are being marketed, the consumers are being encouraged to include it in their daily diet as part of their daily routine. So what you're trying to do is generate brand loyalty. You want to create quality products at good prices so that people stick with you and don't keep chopping and changing between products. Once you've got that brand recognition, once you've got that consumer base, once you've got that revenue, and again, it takes time and a lot of effort, then you're going to become a very attractive proposition for some of the more mainstream companies and some of the bigger boys to come along and want to have a discussion.
Yeah. Heather, any final comments just to wrap up the discussion?
I think the key thing from Gibraltar's point of view is that we're preparing. We're preparing now that the behind the scenes work is ongoing in terms of practitioners learning about it, getting comfortable with the sector, so that when we have the legislation in place, we're all ready. And it's across all counterparts. So you said we have a lot of banks in the audience here, and that's an element that maybe Gibraltar can use. That's different, that people are struggling with in other jurisdictions. So getting everybody lined up now is the key.
Fantastic. So just a quick thanks to both of you once again for joining. Obviously, we have people online, which is fantastic, our first ever hybrid. So I'm very, very pleased that we've maintained everybody online. Thanks to all you guys for joining, but mainly thanks to our sponsors, in this case, Ince Gibraltar and Jig Telecom. And enjoy your breakfast. Thanks for coming.